If you're just joining us, you need to catch up on part 1. But here's what you missed. I thought I'd found Prince Charming at my cousin's wedding when Charles Williams whispered, "Pretend you're with me." For 3 weeks, he swept me into a world of designer dresses, luxury dinners, and high society events. I felt chosen, special, extraordinary. Then I started asking questions about his business. And that's when my fairy tale became a nightmare. Charles revealed he wasn't my boyfriend. I was his cover story. His import-export business was something much darker, and when I threatened to dig deeper, he made it clear that curiosity could be deadly. Now I had a choice: disappear back into my ordinary life, or find out exactly what Charles Williams was hiding. I chose option 2. I chose war. This is the story of how I went from pawn to queen, and how I made sure Charles Williams would never underestimate another woman again. But first, I had to survive what happened when I refused to stay quiet. Before we go on, I'd like to know, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your country or city in the comments below. And if you're new here, welcome to Revenge with Nick, the channel where betrayal gets exposed and justice always wins. Hit that subscribe button and please ring the notification bell. The research started that same night. While Charles probably assumed I was crying into a pint of ice cream, I was doing what investigative-minded people do when they've been lied to. I was hunting for the truth. Williams International Consulting yielded frustratingly little. A basic website with stock photos and vague service descriptions. No client testimonials, no case studies, no real proof that the company did legitimate business of any kind. But Charles had made one mistake during our weeks together. He'd answered his phone in my presence. And I have an excellent memory for voices and names. Klaus Weber. That German accent was distinctive, and Klaus wasn't exactly a common name. A Google search brought up several results, but one made my blood run cold. Klaus Weber, arrested 3 years ago in Munich for money laundering. Charges dropped due to procedural errors. I screenshot everything. Then I remembered another name from Charles's phone calls, Dmitry Volkov. That search was even more productive. Dmitry Volkov, suspected of running illegal gambling operations across Eastern Europe. His photo showed a man with cold eyes and expensive suits who looked like he'd never met a problem he couldn't solve with violence. By 3 a.m., I had a list of 7 names I'd heard Charles mention, and 5 of them had criminal connections ranging from tax evasion to arms trafficking. My fairy tale prince wasn't just involved with criminals, he was the center of their network. I was printing out screenshots when my laptop screen went black. Not sleeping black. Dead black. I tried restarting it, but nothing happened. The power button didn't respond, the charging light didn't come on. It was as if someone had reached through the internet and killed my computer remotely. My phone buzzed with a text from the same unknown number as before. Curiosity killed the cat, Jessica. Stop digging. They were watching me, monitoring my internet activity, and they could reach into my apartment electronically whenever they wanted. I grabbed my backup laptop, an ancient thing I kept for emergencies, and drove to a 24-hour coffee shop across town. If they were monitoring my home internet, maybe a different network would give me some protection. It took an hour to recreate my research, but this time I was smarter about it. I used VPN software, cleared my browser history after each search, and saved everything to an encrypted cloud drive. What I found made my hands shake. Charles Williams didn't just know criminals. He was the financial brain behind an international network that moved illegal money across borders. Shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Cryptocurrency exchanges in countries with weak banking regulations. Import-export businesses that existed on paper but never actually shipped anything except encrypted data. And according to a federal investigation report I found buried in a legal database, the FBI had been building a case against this network for 3 years. Charles Williams was going down. The only question was when. But there was something else in that report that made my stomach drop. A section about associates and romantic partners being considered potential co-conspirators unless proven otherwise. I wasn't just Charles's fake girlfriend. In the eyes of federal investigators, I was a potential criminal. Every event he'd taken me to, Every photo of us together, every witness who'd seen me on his arm, it all painted me as someone who knew about his business and chose to benefit from it anyway. I was being set up. And Charles had been planning this from the moment he whispered, "Pretend you're with me," at that wedding. Jane, I called at 4 a.m., not caring that I was waking her up. "Jess? What's wrong?" "I need you to listen very carefully. Charles isn't just a criminal. He's made me look like his accomplice. If the FBI arrests him, they'll probably arrest me too." "What? How's that possible?" "Because for 3 weeks, I've been his very visible girlfriend at events full of people who can testify that I seemed comfortable in his world. Because I've accepted expensive gifts and attended business functions and acted like I belonged in his life." Jane was quiet for a moment. "Oh, honey, you've been played on multiple levels. I need to get ahead of this. I need proof that I'm a victim, not a co-conspirator." "How?" "By finding evidence that Charles deliberately targeted me. That this was all planned." I was pacing the coffee shop, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Jane, I think he's done this before. I think there have been other women." "What makes you say that?" "Because this whole thing was too smooth, too practiced. He knew exactly how to manipulate me, exactly what I needed to hear. You don't get that good at emotional manipulation without practice." I spent the rest of the night digging into Charles's past. Property records showed he lived in 3 different cities over the past 5 years: Miami, Seattle, and Boston. In each city, he'd operated under slightly different business names, but with the same basic cover story. And in each city, there were society page photos of him with different women. Beautiful, accomplished women who looked happy and radiant on his arm at various charity functions and galas. Until they didn't. Sarah Hendricks, a marketing executive from Miami, had disappeared from Charles's side after 6 months of very public dating. 3 months later, she'd been arrested for tax evasion related to income she claimed never to have received. Dorothy Phillips, a nonprofit director from Seattle, had a similar pattern. Months of high-profile appearances with Charles, then a sudden breakup followed by IRS audits and frozen bank accounts. Jennifer Walsh from Boston was still fighting embezzlement charges related to money that had mysteriously appeared in and disappeared from her organization's accounts during the exact period she'd been dating Charles. He'd done this before. Multiple times. Charles Williams wasn't just a criminal. He was a serial manipulator who used women as disposable cover stories. And when each relationship had served its purpose, he'd made sure his ex-girlfriends were too busy fighting legal battles to cause him any trouble. I was just the latest in a long line of victims. But I was also something he hadn't counted on. I was a victim who knew what was coming. As the sun rose over the coffee shop, I made a decision that would either save my life or end it. I was going to beat Charles at his own game. But first, I needed evidence. Real evidence, not just internet research and circumstantial connections. I needed proof of his criminal activities that would be admissible in court and conclusive enough to destroy his network. Which meant I needed to get close to him again. I drove home as the morning traffic started building, my mind racing with possibilities. Charles thought he'd neutralized me with his threats and revelations. He probably expected me to disappear, to slink back to my ordinary life and stay quiet out of fear. Instead, I was going to give him exactly what he thought he wanted, a scared, grateful woman who was willing to overlook his business activities in exchange for designer dresses and luxury dinners. I was going to play the perfect, willfully ignorant girlfriend. And while I was playing that role, I was going to gather enough evidence to destroy him. The text came at 10 a.m., just as I was getting out of the shower. "I hope you've had time to think about our conversation yesterday. Perhaps I was too harsh. Would you like to have dinner tonight? We should talk." Charles. Perfect timing. He was giving me exactly the opening I needed. I typed back, "I've been thinking all night. You're right, I was asking too many questions. I just want things to go back to the way they were. Dinner sounds perfect." His response was almost immediate. "I'm glad you're being reasonable, Jessica. I'll pick you up at 7. Wear the blue dress. The one from our first real date." The blue dress. He wanted me to wear a symbol of my submission, a reminder of how easily he'd bought my compliance with expensive gifts. He had no idea I was about to turn that symbol into a weapon. I spent the day preparing. Not for a date, but for war. I researched recording apps for my phone, tested them to make sure they worked properly. I practiced acting grateful and apologetic in front of my bathroom mirror until I could make myself blush on command. I planned conversation topics that would make Charles feel safe and superior while giving me opportunities to gather information. Most importantly, I reminded myself why I was doing this. Not just for me, but for Sarah and Dorothy and Jennifer and every other woman Charles had used and discarded. For every victim of his network who'd had their lives destroyed by his greed. And for the woman I used to be, the one who'd been so grateful for scraps of attention that she'd ignored every warning sign. That woman deserved justice too. At 6:45, I put on the blue dress and checked my reflection one last time. I looked exactly like what Charles expected to see, a beautiful, chastened woman who'd learned her place and was ready to play by his rules. But beneath the silk and makeup, I was something else entirely. I was a weapon he'd created without realizing it. And I was about to show Charles Williams what happened when you underestimated the wrong woman. Charles picked me up in the same black car as always, but this time I noticed details I'd missed before. The driver had a small scar above his left eyebrow and kept checking the mirrors more frequently than normal traffic would require. The car had tinted windows that were darker than legal limit, and when I discreetly tested the door handles, I realized they were controlled from the front seat. This wasn't just a luxury car. It was a mobile prison. "You look beautiful," Charles said, settling beside me with the confidence of a man who'd never doubted the outcome of our conversation. "That dress suits you perfectly." "Thank you." I let my voice carry just the right amount of nervousness and gratitude. "Charles, about yesterday. I'm sorry I pushed so hard. I was scared and confused, and I said things I didn't mean." "I understand. My world can be overwhelming for someone who's not used to it." His hand found mine, warm and possessive. "But I'm glad you've decided to trust me." Trust. The word tasted like poison in my mouth, but I smiled and squeezed his fingers. I realized that what we have is more important than understanding every detail of your business. I don't need to know everything to know that you care about me. I do care about you, Jessica. More than you know. His gray eyes studied my face, looking for signs of deception. Which is why I need you to understand that there are certain aspects of my life that must remain private. Not because I don't trust you, but because knowledge can be dangerous. I understand. The recording app on my phone was already running, hidden in my purse with the microphone positioned for optimal sound pickup. "I just want to be with you. Whatever that means." Charles smiled, and for a moment I saw genuine warmth in his expression, which made what I was doing both easier and harder. Part of him might actually care about me, but that same part was perfectly willing to sacrifice me to protect himself. The restaurant he'd chosen was smaller and more intimate than our previous venues. A place where conversations couldn't be overheard, where the lighting was dim enough to hide expressions, where the staff was clearly paid to see nothing and remember less. "I have some associates joining us tonight," Charles said as we were seated at a corner table. "Nothing formal. Just some friends who wanted to meet the woman who's captured my attention." Friends. Right. I'd love to meet them. Within minutes, 3 men appeared at our table. Klaus Weber I recognized from my research, though he was introduced simply as Klaus from overseas. The second man was younger, with the kind of expensive watch and nervous energy that suggested new money and lots of it. The third was older, distinguished, with the bearing of someone who'd spent his life giving orders and having them obeyed without question. "Gentlemen," Charles said, "I'd like you to meet Jessica." "Jessica, these are some of my business partners." "Charming," Klaus said, taking my hand and kissing it with European formality. "Charles has told us so much about you. All good things, I hope." "Oh, very good. He says you're someone who understands the value of discretion." I smiled and tried to look flattered rather than terrified. "I'm still learning about Charles's world, but I'm a quick study." The older man, Charles didn't introduce him by name, leaned forward slightly. "What business are you in, my dear?" "Graphic design. Freelance work, mostly small businesses and non-profits." I shrugged, playing up the harmless artist angle. "Nothing nearly as interesting as what you gentlemen do." Interesting is one word for it, the younger man said with a laugh that sounded more nervous than amused. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in speaking in code. They discussed shipments and clients and overseas transfers in terms so vague they could have been talking about anything. But the recording app was catching every word, and I was memorizing names and dates and locations mentioned in passing. The Prague situation should be resolved by next week, Klaus told Charles. Our friend there has been very cooperative. Excellent. And the Miami connection? Temporarily suspended. Too much attention from the authorities. But we have alternatives. Miami, where Sarah Hendricks had been arrested after dating Charles. Not a coincidence. Jessica, the older man said suddenly, making me jump. You seem very attentive. Are you enjoying our conversation? Oh, I'm just fascinated by international business, I said with what I hoped was convincing enthusiasm. Charles has been teaching me so much about global markets and currency exchange. It's like a whole different world. Indeed it is. His smile was sharp as a razor. A world that requires absolute loyalty from everyone involved. Of course. Charles has explained how important confidentiality is in your industry. Has he? The man's eyes flicked to Charles. And what else has Charles explained? I sense dangerous ground ahead. Just that discretion is essential when you're dealing with sensitive business arrangements. I would never do anything to jeopardize his success. Loyalty is such an attractive quality in a woman, Klaus murmured. Isn't it, Charles? Jessica understands the importance of trust, Charles said firmly. She knows that what benefits me, benefits her. The way he said it made my skin crawl. As if I was a possession rather than a person, something that could be owned and controlled and discarded when no longer useful. But I smiled and nodded like the grateful girlfriend I was pretending to be. After the men left, Charles walked me to a quiet bar a few blocks away. The change in venue felt calculated, somewhere more private where he could assess how much I'd understood and whether I was still playing my assigned role. Your friends seem intense, I said as we settled into a dim corner booth. They're very serious about their business. But you handled yourself well tonight. I hope I didn't embarrass you. Some of the things you all discussed went over my head. That's probably for the best. Charles's hand covered mine on the table. Jessica, I want you to know that bringing you into this part of my life isn't something I do lightly. It means I trust you completely. Trust. There was that word again. I'm honored that you feel that way. There will be more evenings like this. More people for you to meet. More conversations where discretion is essential. Can I count on you? Of course. Whatever you need. He smiled and signaled for another round of drinks. There's a gathering this weekend. More formal than tonight. Some very important people will be there, and it's crucial that everything goes smoothly. What kind of gathering? A business retreat of sorts. Upstate, very private. We'll discuss some significant opportunities, make some important decisions about the future. His thumb traced circles on the back of my hand. I'd like you to come with me. Every instinct I had screamed danger. A private retreat with Charles's criminal associates, far from the city, with no witnesses and no easy escape. It sounded like the perfect place for someone who'd learned too much to disappear permanently. But it also sounded like the perfect place to gather evidence. If Charles's entire network was going to be in one location, discussing business openly enough for me to record. I'd love to come, I said, hoping my voice sounded eager rather than terrified. Excellent. We'll leave Friday evening. Pack for the weekend. Something elegant for Saturday night's dinner, but comfortable clothes for the rest of the time. As Charles drove me home, I thought about what I was getting myself into. A weekend alone with international criminals in a remote location, carrying a hidden recording device and pretending to be the loyal girlfriend of their leader. It was probably the most dangerous thing I'd ever agreed to do. It was also probably my only chance to get the evidence I needed to destroy them all. Jessica, Charles said as we pulled up to my building, I know tonight was a lot to process. If you're having second thoughts. I'm not. I leaned over and kissed his cheek, tasting the expensive cologne that had once made me feel sophisticated and now made me feel sick. I told you, I trust you completely. Good. His hand cupped my face with surprising gentleness. Because after this weekend, there won't be any going back. You'll be part of my world completely. I understand. What I understood was that Charles was giving me one last chance to run. That whatever was happening this weekend would be my final test as his accomplice or my final moments as his victim. But as I rode the elevator to my apartment, I realized something that would have shocked the woman I'd been a month ago. I wasn't planning to run. I wasn't even planning to survive this as a victim. I was planning to emerge as the woman who brought down Charles Williams and his entire criminal network. The only question was whether I was brave enough, or foolish enough, to see it through. I had 3 days to find out. Friday evening came too quickly and not quickly enough. I'd spent 3 days preparing like I was going to war, because in many ways I was. The cabin was exactly what I'd expected, remote, luxurious, and positioned where screams wouldn't carry to any neighbors. A modern glass and steel structure nestled in the Adirondack Mountains, surrounded by enough forest to hide a dozen bodies. Not a comforting thought. Beautiful, isn't it? Charles said as we pulled into the circular driveway. Complete privacy, no cell service, and the nearest town is 40 miles away. No cell service. Of course. It's incredible, I said, and meant it. The cabin was stunning in the way that very expensive isolation often is. How long have you owned it? It belongs to a friend. We use it for strategic planning sessions. Strategic planning. I was betting that was code for where we plan crimes and dispose of problems. Inside, the cabin was even more impressive. Soaring ceilings, walls of windows overlooking pristine wilderness, furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars. And cameras. Small, discreet, but I counted at least 6 in the main living area alone. They weren't taking any chances. The other guests will arrive tomorrow morning, Charles explained as he showed me to a bedroom on the 2nd floor. Tonight, it's just us. The bedroom was another work of expensive art, king-sized bed, fireplace, panoramic windows. And no locks on the doors. I tested the handle while Charles was unpacking his suitcase. Something wrong, he asked. Just admiring the view. I moved to the windows, which offered a spectacular vista of forest and mountains. Also a 60-foot drop to jagged rocks below. It's breathtaking. Wait until you see it at sunrise. Would I live to see sunrise? That remained to be determined. Dinner was surprisingly normal. Charles grilled steaks on the deck while I prepared a salad, and we talked about ordinary things, movies we'd seen, books we'd read, places we wanted to travel. If I hadn't known what he really was, it would have felt romantic. Instead, it felt like my last meal. You're quiet tonight, Charles observed as we finished eating. Just taking it all in. This place this weekend, it feels significant somehow. It is significant. He reached across the table to take my hand. Jessica, after tomorrow, things are going to change for both of us. My business is expanding in ways that will require even more discretion, more loyalty. Are you prepared for that? What does that mean, exactly? It means that after this weekend, you'll know things that make you valuable to my organization. And valuable people need to be protected. Protected. Or controlled. Protected how? With housing that's more secure than your current apartment. With financial arrangements that ensure your comfort, but also your dependence. With understanding about what happens to people who betray my trust. There it was. The trap Charles had been building since our first date. Not just a romantic relationship, but a golden cage designed to keep me grateful, dependent, and silent. You're talking about moving in together? I'm talking about moving you somewhere safe. Where I can take care of you properly. His thumb traced circles on my palm. You'll want for nothing, Jessica. But you'll also understand that loyalty is a two-way street. And if I ever wanted to leave? His smile was gentle, but his eyes were ice. Why would you want to leave? You'd have everything a woman could desire. Everything except freedom. I went to bed that night knowing that tomorrow would determine whether I emerged from this weekend as Charles's prisoner or his destroyer. There was no middle ground anymore. I woke at dawn to the sound of cars in the driveway. Through the bedroom window, I watched 3 black SUVs discharge their passengers. Klaus Weber was there, along with the older man from dinner and several others I didn't recognize. All men, all carrying themselves like people accustomed to violence. Good morning, beautiful. Charles appeared with coffee and the news that breakfast would be in an hour. I hope you slept well. Like a baby. The lie came easily. I'd barely slept at all, too busy listening for footsteps in the hallway and planning escape routes I probably wouldn't be able to use. Excellent. Today's going to be very interesting. The morning meeting took place in a conference room I hadn't seen before, complete with whiteboards, projectors, and enough electronic equipment to suggest these sessions were highly organized affairs. I wasn't invited to attend. Business meetings can be terribly boring, Charles explained as he kissed me goodbye. Why don't you explore the property? There are hiking trails, a beautiful lake. Just don't wander too far. Don't wander too far. Like I was a pet allowed to run free as long as I stayed within my designated territory. But Charles had underestimated me again. I spent the morning doing exactly what he'd suggested, exploring the property. But I wasn't admiring the scenery. I was looking for escape routes, hidden security measures, and ways to get close enough to record the meeting without being detected. The conference room had exterior windows that faced the forest. If I could get close enough without triggering any motion sensors, I might be able to hear and record their conversations. It took me 2 hours to work my way through the trees to a position where I could see and hear what was happening inside. The sound quality wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. And what I heard made my blood run cold. They weren't just discussing money laundering. They were planning something much bigger. Something that involved shipping containers, port authorities, and enough illegal arms to destabilize 3 governments. Charles Williams wasn't just a financial criminal. He was an arms dealer. The buyers in Yemen are getting impatient, Klaus was saying. They need the shipment before the ceasefire talks resume. The weapons are ready, replied the older man. But we need to move them through Morocco instead of Libya. Too much NATO activity in the Mediterranean. What about payment? 200 million, half up front, half on delivery. Charles's voice was clear through the window. The money goes through our usual channels, Cayman accounts, then cryptocurrency, then clean transfers to our Swiss holdings. $200 million in illegal arms sales. I was recording every word. And if there are complications, someone asked. There won't be, Charles said firmly. We have people in place at the port, and our insurance policy guarantees cooperation from local authorities. Insurance policy. That sounded ominous. Speaking of insurance, Klaus said, what about your girlfriend? She seems very interested in our conversations. My heart stopped. Jessica is completely loyal, Charles replied. She understands the importance of discretion. Does she? Because loyalty and understanding aren't the same thing. Understanding can be dangerous. Jessica won't be a problem. How can you be certain? Charles was quiet for a moment. Because after tonight, she won't have a choice. The meeting broke up shortly after that, and I barely made it back to the cabin before the participants emerged from the conference room. I was sitting on the deck, pretending to read a magazine, when Charles found me. How was your morning? He asked. Peaceful. I found that lake you mentioned. It's gorgeous. I'm glad you enjoyed yourself. He sat down beside me, his hand resting on my thigh. Tonight's dinner is going to be special. Very formal, very important. I have something for you to wear. He handed me a garment bag I hadn't seen before. Inside was an evening gown that was beautiful, expensive, and cut in a way that would make hiding a recording device impossible. It's stunning, I said, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. I thought you'd like it. There's also this. He produced a jewelry box containing a necklace that was absolutely breathtaking, diamonds and sapphires in an intricate setting that probably cost more than I'd make in 5 years. It was also clearly designed to be a collar. The clasp was complex, requiring 2 people to fasten or remove it. Once it was on, I wouldn't be able to take it off without help. Charles, this is too much. Nothing is too much for you. His voice was warm, but his eyes were calculating. Besides, tonight is a celebration. We're announcing some very exciting developments, and I want you to look the part of a woman who belongs in my world. The part of a woman who belongs in my world. Not a woman who actually belonged, but one who could play the role convincingly. I spent the afternoon getting ready, but also making preparations Charles wouldn't expect. The evening gown made hiding my phone impossible, but the bathroom had a small window that opened onto a service area behind the cabin. If things went badly, it might be my only escape route. I also found something interesting while searching the guest bedroom, a laptop in the closet, probably forgotten by a previous visitor. It was password protected, but it was also connected to the cabin's Wi-Fi network. If I could get access to it, I might be able to contact the outside world. Dinner was a formal affair in the cabin's dining room. The table was set with crystal and silver, candles provided atmospheric lighting, and the conversation was the kind of civilized discussion that made mass murder sound like a business opportunity. To new ventures, Charles proposed, raising his wine glass. To profitable partnerships, Klaus replied. To ensuring our continued success, added the older man. They drank, and I felt like I was toasting at my own funeral. Jessica, Charles said as the main course was served, I want you to know how proud I am to have you here tonight. You represent something very important to our organization. What's that? The future. The kind of woman who can move in any social circle, who can be trusted with sensitive information, who understands that loyalty is the most valuable currency we deal in. The kind of woman who can be controlled, he meant. I'm honored to be here, I said, and felt sick saying it. Soon you'll be much more than an honored guest, Charles continued. After tonight, you'll be family. And family takes care of each other. Family. The word made me think of Sarah Hendricks and Dorothy Phillips and Jennifer Walsh. Had Charles used the same word with them before destroying their lives? What exactly does that mean? I asked. It means you'll never have to worry about money again. Never have to struggle with freelance work or difficult clients or whether you can pay your rent. Charles's hand found mine across the table. It also means you'll understand that family secrets are sacred. That betraying family trust has consequences. What kind of consequences? Klaus laughed softly. The permanent kind. The threat was unmistakable, delivered with the casual cruelty of men who'd made similar threats before and followed through on them. But as I sat there, wearing a dress worth more than my car and jewelry that would make me a target for robbery anywhere outside this criminal's paradise, I realized something important. Charles had miscalculated. He thought I was here because I was grateful and greedy and easily controlled. He thought the expensive gifts and luxurious surroundings had bought my loyalty. What he didn't understand was that I'd been recording everything. That I had enough evidence to destroy his entire network. That while he'd been planning to make me his prisoner, I'd been planning to make him mine. Charles, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, I need to ask you something important. Of course. Do you really think I'm stupid enough to walk into this trap without an insurance policy of my own? The table went very quiet. Charles's expression shifted from confident to confused to something much more dangerous. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the recordings I've been making. The evidence I've gathered. The federal contacts I've already reached out to. I smiled at him across the table. I'm talking about the fact that you're all under arrest. That's when the windows exploded inward and armed federal agents poured into the dining room like an avenging army. The rest happened very quickly. Charles lunged across the table toward me, but an agent tackled him before he could reach me. Klaus tried to run for the back door and found it blocked by more agents. The older man actually reached for a gun he had concealed under his jacket, which was a very poor decision that resulted in him being face down on the floor with zip ties around his wrists before he could clear the holster. Jessica Smith? The lead agent was a woman about my age with tired eyes and a bulletproof vest. Agent Sarah Martinez, FBI. Are you all right? I'm fine. My hands were shaking, but I was fine. I have recordings. Evidence. Everything you need. We know. You did good work. As the agents led Charles and his associates away in handcuffs, he looked back at me one last time. The charming mask was completely gone, replaced by pure rage. You have no idea what you've done, he snarled. No idea who you're dealing with. Actually, I said, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A pathetic man who preys on vulnerable women because he's too weak to face anyone who might fight back. Agent Martinez smiled grimly. Ms. Smith, we're going to need you to come with us for debriefing. There's a lot to go over. What about his other victims? Sarah Hendricks, Dorothy Phillips, Jennifer Walsh. Already in protective custody. Your evidence helped us locate and protect all of them. Martinez paused. You saved more than just yourself tonight. As I walked out of that cabin, still wearing Charles's expensive dress and diamond collar, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Freedom. Real freedom. Not the fake freedom that comes from expensive gifts and luxury dinners, but the freedom that comes from refusing to be anyone's victim. Charles Williams had chosen me because he thought I was weak, grateful, and easily controlled. He'd been wrong on all counts. And now he was going to spend the rest of his life learning just how wrong he'd been. 6 months later, I sat in a coffee shop in downtown Brooklyn, laptop open, working on a logo design for a nonprofit that helped victims of financial fraud. The irony wasn't lost on me. The media attention had been intense but brief. Local woman helps FBI bust international arms dealing ring had been a headline for exactly one news cycle before being replaced by fresher scandals. I'd done a few interviews, testified at Charles's trial, and then gratefully faded back into anonymity. But the real change was deeper than the headlines suggested. My freelance business had exploded after the publicity. Turns out, companies liked hiring the graphic designer who'd outsmarted international criminals. I'd been able to move to a better apartment, pay off my student loans, and even start saving money for the first time in my adult life. More importantly, I'd helped the FBI uncover a network that had been operating for over a decade. Charles Williams was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Klaus Weber and his associates received sentences ranging from 25 to 40 years. The arms shipment to Yemen was intercepted before it could destabilize an entire region. Sarah Hendricks, Dorothy Phillips, and Jennifer Walsh had all been cleared of charges and compensated for their suffering. We'd formed our own little support group for women who'd survived Charles Williams and lived to warn others about predators who wore expensive suits and offered fairy tale promises. He had a type, Sarah had said during one of our video calls. Intelligent, independent women who'd been overlooked or undervalued. Women hungry enough for recognition that we'd ignore red flags in exchange for feeling special. She was right. Charles had been a master at identifying and exploiting emotional vulnerabilities. But he'd also made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed that vulnerability was the same thing as weakness. Jessica. Jane's voice broke through my thoughts as she slid into the chair across from me. You're spacing out again. Just thinking about how much has changed. Good changes. I considered the question. 6 months ago, I'd been a struggling freelancer desperate for validation and willing to ignore obvious warning signs because a handsome, wealthy man was paying attention to me. Today, I was a successful business owner who'd helped bring down an international criminal network and saved several women from the same fate I'd narrowly escaped. Very good changes. Jane grinned. Good. Because I have news. Derek's article about international romance scams just won a journalism award, and he specifically credited you as the source who made it possible. Derek was the investigative journalist Jane had introduced me to after Charles's arrest. His subsequent article about criminal networks that used romantic manipulation as cover had led to investigations in 12 countries and the arrest of 37 suspects. That's wonderful. He also asked me to ask you if you'd be interested in consulting on a book about the case. Publishers are very interested in the story of how you turned the tables on Charles. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to move on, to leave Charles Williams and his manipulations in the past where they belonged. But another part of me remembered the women who might still be out there, sitting alone at weddings or charity galas or business dinners, vulnerable to the next Charles Williams who came along with expensive gifts and fairy tale promises. Set up a meeting, I said finally. Jane's smile was triumphant. Really? Really? But not because you're trying to set me up with Derek romantically, I added quickly. Because this story needs to be told. Deal. Though for the record, Derek is exactly the kind of man you should be dating when you're ready. Honest, intelligent, committed to justice. Jane. Right. Focusing on the work, not the matchmaking. After Jane left, I sat in the coffee shop and thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago. Desperate for validation, grateful for scraps of attention, so hungry for someone to choose me that I'd ignored every instinct that warned me something was wrong. That woman was gone, replaced by someone harder, smarter, more self-reliant. Someone who understood that being alone wasn't the same thing as being lonely, and that being chosen wasn't always a blessing. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Congratulations on your success. You should know that Charles had friends who remember what you did to him. Be careful. A concerned observer. 6 months ago, that message would have sent me into a panic. Today, I screenshotted it and forwarded it to Agent Martinez with a note. FYI, looks like someone's still trying to intimidate me. Let me know if you need me to file a formal report. Her response came back within minutes, already tracing the number. These people never learn, do they? No, they didn't learn. Men like Charles Williams built their power on the assumption that their victims would stay victims. That women like me would remain grateful and quiet and controllable. They never expected us to fight back. As I packed up my laptop and prepared to head home to my new apartment with its deadbolt locks and security system, I thought about the story I'd tell Derek when we met. Not just about Charles and his network, but about the deeper truth I'd learned. The most dangerous predators are the ones who make you feel special while they're hunting you. They don't attack your weaknesses, they attack your hopes. They don't break you down. They build you up just enough to make you dependent on their version of your worth. But here's what they don't understand. When you've been invisible your whole life, you learn to see everything. When you've been overlooked, you notice details other people miss. And when you've survived being someone's pawn, you develop the kind of strength that no amount of manipulation can break. Charles Williams had chosen me because he thought I was weak, grateful, and easy to control. He'd been wrong on all counts. And now, as I walked through Brooklyn in the late afternoon sunlight, planning how I could help protect other women from the kind of predator who wore designer suits and offered fairy tale promises, I realized something that would have shocked the woman I used to be. I liked being someone who couldn't be easily fooled. I liked being someone who asked hard questions and demanded real answers. I liked being someone who'd rather be alone than be with someone who saw her as a tool to be used rather than a person to be valued. Charles had been right about one thing. He'd given me the most important month of my life. Not because he'd made me feel chosen, but because he'd taught me the difference between being selected and being valued, between being useful and being loved. And he'd shown me that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes the best revenge is becoming someone who can't be hurt the same way twice. My phone rang as I reached my building, Jane's name lighting up the screen. Derek can meet Thursday at 2 p.m., she said without preamble. His office in Manhattan. And Jess? He's really excited to work with you. Says you're exactly the kind of source he needs for this story. Good, I said, unlocking my door with keys that belonged to an apartment I'd paid for with money I'd earned through my own skills and determination. I'm exactly the kind of source he should be excited to work with. Look at you, being confident and self-assured. I love this version of Jessica. I laughed as I entered my apartment, my safe, secure, entirely paid-for by-me apartment. You know what? So do I. And as I hung up the phone, I realized that Charles Williams had been wrong about something else, too. This wasn't the end of my story. This was just the beginning. Because sometimes the best fairy tales are the ones where the princess saves herself. And sometimes the best endings are the ones where the pawn becomes the queen. If this story hit home for you, you're not alone. Millions of people have experienced some form of manipulation or emotional abuse, often from people who seemed too good to be true. The warning signs are real: love bombing with expensive gifts, isolation from friends and family, gradually increasing control, and making you feel grateful for basic respect. Trust your instincts. Value your independence. And remember that you deserve to be chosen for who you are, not for what you can provide. Comment below. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to control you through generosity? Share this story if you think someone needs to hear it. And remember, sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be anyone's pawn ever again. If you enjoyed this story of justice and empowerment, subscribe to Revenge with Nick for more stories where the underdog wins and the truth always comes out in the end. Thanks for watching, and remember, you're stronger than you know.